afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the March 11th, 2026 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting format. For work sessions like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment, and those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meetings materials page of the City of Eugene website. Thank you again for joining us today. And I now call the March 11th, 2026 work session of the Eugene City Council to order. And we will turn right over to the city manager to introduce our first topic, which is a work session on long-range financial planning, benchmarking, and next steps.
Thank you, Mayor. This will be the first in a series of long-range financial planning work sessions that we hold with Council this spring and early summer. We have our Chief Financial Officer, Twyla Miller, here, along with consultant Sarah Emmons from SME Consulting, that will present data about benchmarking that was done as part of the TAG process from last fall as well. And we'll also talk a little bit about next steps for this long-range financial planning conversation. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Twyla.
Good afternoon. I'm Twyla Miller, your Chief Financial Officer. I'm having some audio issues today, so if that continues a bit later, I can always turn my camera off. But today I'm here with Sarah Emmons. In February, Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide, that would be great. In February, you received the final report from the Technical Advisory Group on Fiscal Stability, or TAG. As part of that process, Sarah gave a great benchmarking presentation to that group, which she's going to do today. And while benchmarking jurisdictions, I think you'll find this very informational and informative as you think about the future.
Twyla,
so after Sarah's presentation, yes.
This is Mayor Knutson. We are having some issues with your audio, so feel free to turn off your video.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better?
It sounds like it so far.
Okay. Apologies for that. So as I was saying, Sarah's going to give a great benchmarking presentation. And while benchmarking isn't apples to apples, given the differences between jurisdictions, I think you'll find this presentation to be very informative. After Sarah's presentation, I'll provide a brief overview of the long-range financial planning work that will be coming back to Council after your break this spring and summer. And at the end of our presentation, there will be plenty of time for questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah for her presentation.
Great, thank you, Twyla, and thank you, Mayor and members of City Council and City Manager for the opportunity to be here again. And really thank you again for the opportunity to be a part of the TAG, because that was just a very enjoyable process. I really enjoyed learning about Eugene, and actually the excellent questions that the TAG asked when I did this original presentation, I think will make the product that we look at today even better, because I was able to not only add another year of census data, but also kind of refine the analysis based on their presentation. So that just to note that some of the numbers that I'd show today might be just a little bit different than the numbers that are in the report appendix to the TAG report, and that's because I have updated data. So just to start, as a reminder, the city was benchmarked against a handful of cities that are similar and different, as we'll talk about, to Eugene. These are Salem and Bend in Oregon, Boise, Idaho, Fort Collins, Colorado, which is home to Colorado State University, and Spokane, Washington. All of these cities were selected because they are regionally similar to Oregon. They're either located in Oregon or they're in the Northwest or the Mountain West. And a few of them have either a large university, just like Eugene does, or at least a major employer that really drives a portion of the economy. And I would say for Salem, that's obviously the state government, and for Bend, that's obviously the recreation economy. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those aspects of these communities as we move forward. The key findings that we're going to talk about today, this is not organized in a way that you can kind of tell the themes, but we're going to talk, I'm sort of circling here these first three themes, which really relate to community characteristics. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some demographic analysis that was done to kind of show what these communities look like in comparison to Eugene, how Eugene is similar and different in terms of primarily age, income, and housing issues. Then we'll talk a little bit about fiscal findings. So don't worry, I will show these kind of in the sections that we'll spend more time talking about these as we go through these sections. But we'll talk about kind of the fiscal findings that became apparent through a comparison of city budget data, and that relates primarily to property taxes and the fact that Oregon cities are more reliant on property taxes, and that, as you know, Oregon's property tax is significantly more constrained than that of the other states in this group. We'll also talk about the fact that Eugene does a lot. It's a full-service city, in my opinion, compared to many of the cities on this list. And you can kind of see that when we take a peek at the head counts for each of these cities. But despite that, it does spend less on a per capita basis than the other cities in the group. And then finally, at the end of this presentation, we'll turn back to some economic data that I showed you last month when I was in Eugene related to job growth and where Eugene compares in terms of job growth, before finally turning to somebody else's work, a different benchmark showing the quote, best managed big US cities that the city manager pro tem actually sent to me. Is really interesting, and I wanted to share with you all today. So just again, these are the cities that we'll be talking about today. They're shown here in the order of their population from largest to smallest. So you can see Eugene's kind of in the middle here. Bend is significantly smaller. Boise and Spokane, of course, are significantly larger. We have them here, showing the square miles. So Eugene is the second smallest in terms of square miles of the cities on this list, and we'll talk about this with one of the metrics that we'll look at later on. And then we wanted to include higher ed enrollment. So again, not all of these cities are what you would call a college towns. So Spokane, Salem, and Bend certainly aren't college towns. But just for reference, we did include the higher ed enrollment of the schools shown on this list. And that is because we will be talking a lot about census data. And when you talk about census data with a college town, that younger population does kind of funny things with the data that we can't always control for. So we just wanted to make sure we had the relative populations of the higher ed institutions on this list. This is like my spiel that I have to give whenever I give a benchmarking presentation, and it's really important to think about this when you hear this data. So as Twyla mentioned, it's really almost impossible to do a perfect comparison across cities. We're going to talk about where there are similarities. We already did in terms of size and geography. We'll talk about where there are differences that might impact the role that the city plays or how the city functions within the region that might be apparent when we talk about community and economic characteristics. And then really where this is important to remember, of course, is when we look at the budget data, because cities have different responsibilities, they have different authorizing environments, and it's really impossible to control for these. So as we go through the data, I'll point out differences that I note, and you members of council might hear things that you are curious about or have observations about how Eugene functions that might be different than these other cities. And I would love to hear those in the Q&A portion as well. So again, to start, we'll take a look at some census data, and these are the takeaways from my analysis from mostly American Community Survey data from 2024. And these are that Eugene has fewer children and fewer people of working age, which I'll define in a couple slides, than the other comparable cities. Eugene's younger households have lower incomes and are less likely to be, of the homeowners in Eugene, they are less likely to be these younger households, even compared to Fort Collins, which is another kind of large population college town. And then third, that Eugene has more homeless people, which again, you know, is a statewide issue, and more cost-burdened renters than other cities in the group. I'm actually going to flip to this next slide and then go back to the previous one because I had these out of order. But we're going to start by looking at the age of people who live in each of these cities. And just to orient you to how these slides look, wherever Eugene appears, it will likely be highlighted in orange. The Oregon cities will be light blue, and then the cities that are in other states will appear as dark blue on these slides. So to start, this chart shows population by age. So when you look at the under age of 18 category, Eugene has fewer a lower share of its population is under age 18, so it's proportionately fewer children than the other cities on this list, especially when you look up here at Salem, which almost 22% of the population is under the age of 18. Jumping over to here to this age 25 to 44 category, this is the other category that kind of pops out to me. Eugene has fewer of what I would call a working age population, so people in the age of 25 to 44, 26% compared to 32% in Spokane, Washington. These populations, you could think maybe go together because this is the population that might have children in the under age 18 category. So I just thought that was interesting once we kind of split out this population by age and looked at it more closely. And of course, this right here, this age 18 to 24 category is really where you would see what we would think of as student age population, the University of Oregon population. Although, of course, some of them might be kind of trickling over into this category as well. And then it was sort of middle of the pack in terms of population between age 45 to 64 and the 65 plus population. So I just thought that was interesting. And this is what I would consider to be kind of like your older working population. It's the age range that I fall into, so I'm not trying to offend anybody by calling it that, but also actually maybe at the lower end of this range as well. So when we think about those populations, it's interesting to think about income. And this is really an aspect that I didn't get to spend as much time on with the tag, but I'm really glad that they were asking the questions they were. Because when you look over here on the left, this is total income, median household income in the past 12 months for each of these cities. Eugene had the lowest income, and this is the only data point that I showed when we met with the tag. And so, of course, we got the question, well, Eugene has the University of Oregon, so how as much is that population affecting the household income? So that's the chart that's the breakout that I'm showing you here to the right. And my takeaway is that Eugene's younger households, so not the student age population, which of course you would expect does have significantly lower incomes than other cities in the group, but really this younger household population, so households that are headed by people aged 25 to 44 have lower incomes than the other cities on the list. And they do as well for that 45 to 64 age range as well. So they're second lowest above Spokane only for incomes in this group. The 65 plus population, these incomes would include any kind of, obviously salaries and wages, but also any kind of regular retirement benefits as well, but it would exclude any capital gains related income. So the takeaway again is that younger households have lower median incomes than they do in the other cities in the group. Also, just before we move on, thought it was interesting that the very young population has significantly higher incomes in Bend than these other college towns. I'm imagining that's because younger folks there working in the recreation industry tend to be just working more than the students. So now we're going to take a look at a few slides that relate to housing. So this chart on the left shows housing tenure, either renter-occupied homes, which are light blue, or owner-occupied homes, which are dark blue. Eugene does have more renters, so there are 52% of people in Eugene are renting and 48% are living in owner-occupied homes. And Fort Collins is kind of the second most renters, and this makes sense just given the relative share of the student populations was so high in Eugene and Fort Collins compared to those other cities. Another interesting aspect of Eugene we took a look at with the tag relates to the fact that Eugene is a relatively low square mileage compared to these other cities. So I did like a very rough measure of density, which is just population per square mile, which is not a planner's definition. So forgive me, but I thought it was interesting to point out that, in addition to having a lot of renters, Eugene has a higher population per square mile, so greater population density than these other cities. This is a breakout showing the percent of homeowners by age in each of these cities. So the way to read this is not that 22% of people under age 44 own a home in Eugene. It's of all the people who own homes, how many of them are under 44. And this is organized, sorted here by the share of homeowners who are over the age of 65. And I thought this was really interesting, especially when we think about the fact that fewer people in Eugene own homes, that so many of them are over age 65 relative to these other cities. And that was the case for the other Oregon cities as well, actually by a significant margin. When you look at the greatest share of people in Boise, for example, who own homes, they are in that kind of older working age population that we talked about, the 45 to 64. So I wanted to point that out. This slide shows how, homelessness, which is, of course, obviously a statewide issue. I believe Oregon ranks only behind Hawaii and New York in terms of homeless counts. And Eugene has one of the highest counts in the state. So Eugene has higher rates of homelessness, which is shown here on the left compared to both of the Oregon cities, which themselves are above all of the cities in this sample. So here's Spokane, here's Boise, and then here's Colorado. Certainly there are probably weather aspects that play into the lower counts here. It's inhospitably cold. But obviously homelessness is a complex issue. And so unfortunately, one of the things this analysis did not get into is kind of resources to address or to help homeless people, simply because of the time and the focus of the tag. The chart on the right shows a measure of cost burden among renters. So housing costs over 30% of income in the last 12 months. For Eugene and Fort Collins, these are at the higher end of this rating. And of course, this would directly relate to the fact that there are so many students in both of these cities. Although in Eugene, because there's such a large portion of the market a large portion of the population does rent, I think it's an important stat to point out as you all as decision makers are thinking about kind of what the city looks like and just making decisions about housing and that sort of thing. In terms of owned units, the housing costs as a share of income were at the bottom end of the range here. And I don't have the chart that shows the median rent or the median income, median household or home value, but Eugene was kind of in the middle of the pack when we looked across these cities. So this is, I think, primarily a function of income, and then here probably of age. We also talked a little bit about crime rates, and we included these, this was included when the tag was meeting because of the discussions around how the city is spending its resources, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in this presentation as well, how these cities invest in public safety. And so crime is just kind of one aspect, both on the demand side and the service side, that I think is directly related to public safety investment. So Eugene has the second highest property crime rate of the cities in this sample, shown here, highlighted in orange and behind only the city of Spokane. But its violent crime rate is in the middle of the pack, exactly in the middle of the pack here compared to the other cities. So that's the overview, sort of the context for how the city of Eugene looks, how its population looks compared to other cities. There were a couple of data points that I realized this morning I forgot from the tag, and I'm happy to answer questions about those at the end, but related to employment and educational attainment, which I wished I'd included. But hopefully that'll give you kind of an overview. It was intended to give the tag an overview of how the city feels as a community as we turn to the budget findings. So in terms of the fiscal findings, the things that were takeaways from an analysis of, this is fiscal year 2025 adopted budget data from these cities, and the year was chosen primarily because of the timing of the tag and when that analysis and data were collected. Eugene spends less on a per capita basis than all of the cities in this group in fiscal year 2025. Another takeaway that we'll spend a little bit of time talking about, because it does directly relate to city budgets, is sort of what the responsibilities are of Eugene as a city compared to the other cities on this list. And the takeaway for me is that Eugene is comparatively full service compared to these other cities, which directly relates to the headcount. The city does have more FTE in-house than other cities that we looked at. The Oregon cities are more reliant on property taxes than other cities, and the property tax system is more constrained than other states in this group. I know there's a national study out there. I tried to find it before this presentation, but at least compared to this group of Idaho, Colorado, and Washington, I think that's directly relevant, obviously, to the solutions that you all are struggling to find. So when we talk about city budgets, it's really important to understand what the city itself as a government entity is responsible for in-house compared to other jurisdictions or districts or entities that might operate in these regions. So this chart has the various functions that are operated by Eugene or some of these other cities with an X, and the X denotes does the city have staff in-house that do this thing, except for utilities, which are denoted by a number, and that simply means how many utilities each of these cities is responsible for. So the first takeaway for me when I put this data together is that every city has central services, which is kind of your management and administrative functions, and every city is required, of course, to have police service. But when you go from municipal court all the way down to streets, which are also something that every city has to take care of, Eugene is the only city on this list that has an X in every line here. So it's the only city that, for example, it's Eugene and Fort Collins are the only cities that operate 911 dispatch, which is, we'll see when we talk about police budget in a few slides. It's the only city that operates both parks and libraries, or one of the only cities that operates both parks and libraries. And so I think that will really be apparent when we talk about the head count for each of these cities. Of course, the other takeaway is that there are parks and library services in Bend, for example, but Parks is operated by the Bend Parks and Recreation District, and library is operated by the Deschutes Public Library District. So service recipients in each of these cities are still paying for these services. They're just not paying the city to do them. And we will take a peek at property tax rates kind of toward the end of this section of the presentation and talk about what that looks like for the people who live in these cities. So with that kind of context in mind, the first part of the next few slides will focus on city spending. So this chart shows total spending, which is the black numbers up here, and then general fund, which is the dark blue portion of this bar, and other fund, which is the light blue portion of this bar, again, from fiscal year 25 adopted budgets for each of the cities. And Eugene is the second lowest in terms of total spending. There's some nuance there related largely to utilities that we can talk about in a few slides. And the third lowest, in terms of general fund spending, although you can see it's kind of on a par with Fort Collins and Salem, which actually are very close to it in size. One of the reasons that Spokane's light blue portion of its bar here is so big is that it administers 4 utilities, the fourth one being garbage collection, and its own pension fund. And for Fort Collins, one of the reasons that the light blue portion is so large is that it has a very, very large and complex enterprise park system that's actually quite a revenue generator for the city, and we'll talk about that later. And just the fact that Spokane and Boise are significantly larger cities, they're about 50 to 60,000 more in population than these 3 cities on the list. Bend, of course, is about 70,000 people fewer, and it's pretty close in size to Eugene's budget. So that difference in population is one of the things that I want to address on the next slide, because as you know, total spending can only tell you so much when these cities have different responsibilities and are different in size. So we took a look at the city spending data in 2 different ways, attempting to normalize it, both across population, which is the graph that's shown on the left, as well as a share of household income, which is the graph that's shown on the right. So by both of these different measures of comparison, Eugene is at the lower end in terms of total spending, but about the same in general fund spending as the other cities. And again, that total fund, the fact that the total spending is a little bit lower may have to do with the fact that Eugene doesn't operate as many utilities as the other cities do. And the fact that its general fund spending is on a par with the other cities is interesting to me because many of the functions that I called out in the service chart are what you would consider general services that are typically funded, at least in part, from the general fund. So Eugene is really stretching these dollars far when you think about how many responsibilities it has in-house. I know I'm going really fast because questions are at the end, so I'll slow down a little bit so you can look at these. Oh, one additional note that I wanted to make on here, because I think this came up actually as a question when I was meeting with the TAG, is that this percentage here does not mean that people spend 6.8% or households spend 6.8% of their income on city expenditures. Rather, this calculation is just intended to kind of show relative size. So it's really just simply total expenditures divided by aggregate household income, which is a measure that the census provides. So I don't mean to imply that 7% is how much people spend on government. Okay, so as you know, for most local governments, and Eugene is no exception, the personnel costs are really one of the true drivers of spending levels. So we can't talk about city budgets without looking at headcount. Eugene does have the third highest per capita headcount of all the cities in the group, and the highest headcount of the Oregon cities on a per capita basis. And again, this directly relates in my mind to the number of functions that Eugene is responsible for in-house, not a normative statement at all, just kind of trying to explain where the data are coming from. So the way to read this is for every 1,000 residents in Eugene, there are 9.5 citywide employees, and of those, 4.5 FTE are charged to the general fund. So 4.5 general fund FTE per 1,000 residents. And you can see the total FTE counts here. So there were 3 areas that the TAG was interested in learning more about, and so those are police, fire, and parks. So we'll take a few slides here to kind of look at relative spending and relative staffing within each of those functions. So what you're seeing here is per capita spending on police. The bars are organized by police. I didn't want to change the order for each one. Fire and parks. Eugene has the second highest spending in terms of police, the third highest fire spending, so that's the middle bar here, and the second lowest spending on parks of all the cities in the sample. Again, Bend is part of this Bend Parks and Recreation District, but I didn't want to include per capita. Actually was probably could have grabbed it, but in the interest of time, I wasn't able to grab it in time for this analysis, and it doesn't align perfectly with Bend's boundaries, so wasn't able to use the city population. I would imagine that it's probably at the higher end here, but we can circle back if that is of interest. So city staffing, again, just for police and fire are shown here. And for police, that's the Eugene has the second highest total FTE per 1,000 residents. This would be an imperfect measure. The best way to do this would be to look at commissioned staff, but this is department level. And one of the reasons that Fort Collins and Eugene are higher at the higher end of this group is that they both include 911 dispatch functions, which are not staffed in-house in the other cities on this list. In terms of fire spending, Eugene is about second or third lowest in, fire staffing. Eugene is the second or third lowest in the cities on this sample. And again, Eugene, Bend, and Salem do operate ambulance services in-house, and that would be, some of these FTE would be a portion of this 1.2. So something to know just in terms of the city responsibilities. Spokane also pays for ambulance services, but does not operate it. So it would appear in their budget, but not in their head count. So that's that wraps up sort of the spending portion of the analysis that was shown to the TAG. Again, I'll happy to answer questions about that later. So now we're going to move to the revenue side of the ledger and sort of how those services that we just talked about are paid for. And of course, property taxes are the largest source of general fund revenue in the city of Eugene and the other Oregon cities as well. And so this is a chart that helps us understand what the limitations are to property tax authority in each of these cities. All of them, all states have some sort of constitutional and or statutory limitations on local property taxes. I won't read this chart, but I will point out that only Oregon has both a growth limitation, so a limitation in how much property tax levies can grow per year, as well as a rate limitation, so a limitation on the overall size of the rate. So Washington does have both a growth limitation and a rate limitation, but I think one of the differences between Oregon and Washington, and why I have a statement here that says Oregon's system is more restrictive, is that Oregon also has a permanent rate, which the state of Washington does not. Oregon also has, I forgot to put it on the slide, but it occurred to me during my cram session for this presentation. Oregon also has the freezing of assessed value at kind of 1997 levels. And I think that's also critical to kind of understanding why property taxes are so constrained in Oregon. Again, I'm sure there's a national study looking at how restrictive state property tax systems are, and I'm sure Oregon would be at the higher end. And if nobody has written that, I should probably write it in my spare time, because I've been looking at this issue, not just in Eugene, but in other Oregon cities as well. So outside of property taxes, what taxes do these cities have access to or authority to implement to pay for general city operations? So this is, of course, outside of enterprise functions like utilities. And so we looked at a few different categories of taxes. City sales tax, it is actually legal in Oregon, but very, very, very uncommon. I think there's one city that has a food and beverage tax, but other than that, this is not a common. This is not found in Oregon. Idaho cities are also not, I don't know if they're not allowed or they just don't do it, but they don't have there's no local sales tax in Boise, but the city does receive a portion of state sales tax revenue, and as one of the larger cities in Boise, that portion is significant. Fort Collins has a relatively high sales tax rate, 4.35% on sales other than food. And then Spokane has a 1.1%. 1% is general operations. They have a 0.1 for something. There's a bunch of different kinds of local options here in Washington State, where I'm based, that cities have access to. Eugene is the only city on the list that has a local gas tax. And then there are different other kinds of excise taxes. And by excise taxes, I mean taxes that are designed to excise a portion of economic activity that is happening within city boundaries. So everybody but Boise has some sort of excise tax. In Washington State, there are a number of different kinds, and they are very principal revenue sources for local governments. And then in terms of other taxes, Eugene, of course, has the community safety payroll tax that's shown here. And Spokane has these other different kinds of, really they are all excise taxes, but the category would have been too big. Then primary one being a utility tax, which is like a gross receipts tax levied on utility providers within city boundaries. And so the takeaway from this is that in terms of other tax options, and we will see this in the data in a few slides, Oregon cities really don't have as many, or don't have as really many commonly used options as these other cities in other states do. Not appearing on this list, but relevant to our discussion, are Salem's operations fee, which is, I believe, deposited into its general fund because it does fund general operations, and then a transportation fee that's imposed in Bend and is designed to take care of capital and maintenance and operation needs in Bend. Both of these are fees that are collected through utility bills, and they're they're becoming increasingly common in Oregon. But they are designed to support broader city operations. I see a raised hand. I think we are doing questions at the end, but I would defer to the mayor if she wants to allow one, because somebody has their hand up.
Yes, Sarah, please continue. We'll do questions at the end, and Councilor Zelenka is just adding himself to the queue. Thank you.
Oh, got it. Okay, thanks. Thanks for signaling. I wasn't looking at the boxes, so I'm sorry if I missed other hands.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, in terms of city revenue, so I just wanted to provide that context on the property taxing authority and the other taxing authority before we looked at the city revenues, because I think you can kind of see the impact of those restrictions here when we look at the data. So just a broad view, this is the same view that we looked at on the expenditure side, but this is total revenues shown here in black, other fund revenues, so things like utility fees and the community safety payroll tax here in Eugene. And then the dark blue would be general fund revenues. And in Eugene, about 40% of revenues went to the general fund in fiscal year 25. Usually these light blue revenues are reserved for specific uses. In fact, almost entirely are put in other funds because they are reserved primarily for other uses. And Ben's transportation fee that we just talked about on the previous slide is part of this light blue portion here that goes into a separate fund as well. There's no right or wrong about where the funding goes. I know Corvallis actually puts its local option levies into the general fund, so it's really just a budgeting mechanism. There's no good or bad about it. So this is the general fund only, and the dark blue portions of this bar denote taxes, and the light blue portions of this bar are other sources of revenue, so things like license fees, charges, et cetera. There's a note here at the bottom. So Salem collects a city operations fee, which is based on a monthly flat fee that's attached to the utility accounts, and so that would be a part of this lighter blue portion. And it's one of the reasons that when you look at kind of the balance of other revenues and taxes, it's about 50-50 in Salem. So the general fund is significantly less reliant on property taxes than the other Oregon cities. And here's Eugene right in the middle. Again, this is not normalized for population or anything else, so it's simply a total measure. So we talked about reliance on property taxes in the previous slide. Because Eugene does have its community safety payroll tax, it's significantly less reliant on property taxes compared to the other Oregon cities. Maybe a little bit more resembles Boise, which again has that infusion of state shared sales tax here in the light blue. But you can see when it compared to the two cities that are in states that allow sales tax, they are significantly less reliant on property taxes than they are on other taxes like sales taxes or excise taxes. Again, not a good or bad statement, just kind of pointing out one of the differences. And so these are the dollar amounts, but when you look at the shares, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Salem is only almost 94% of Salem's taxes are property taxes, I should say. Whereas in Eugene, it's about 77%. And then you can see those two states that allow, cities and states that allow other types of taxes. This is an attempt kind of like that, apples to apples slide I showed earlier to just show the amount of taxes collected by the city on a per household basis. Not meaning that in Eugene households spend $2,500.13 on taxes, but really just that, if you took the total amount of city taxes collected in Eugene and divided it by the number of households, this is about where you would land. This is a very commonly used, but kind of horrible measure of tax burden, but I wanted to include it just because I think it's of interest. Not all taxes in Eugene or any of these cities are paid by households. Many of them are paid by businesses, obviously, especially when you're looking at property taxes. And frankly, in Fort Collins and Spokane, which have sales taxes, many taxes are paid by visitors because they are capturing kind of economic activity from visitors who are buying things in city boundaries. So when we talk about tax burden and kind of comparative tax bills, it's important, at least in the Oregon context, to really understand property tax rates and the differences in the cities that we looked at for this analysis. So Eugene has a higher city property tax rate than the other two Oregon cities in this group, although, of course, the city only receives a portion of the permanent rate because the rest goes to the urban renewal district. And so this top chart alone is what I'm talking about right now. This chart shows the permanent rate in each of these cities, the local option rate if they have a levy for parks or something else, and then the bond levy on top of that. And the totals are shown here. So Eugene's total city property tax rate is $8.20. In Bend, it's about $4.14, which sounds low, but on the next slide we'll talk about kind of what that means in the context of home values as well. And of course, as anybody who has paid a property tax bill knows, that's not your whole property tax. You're also paying taxes to other districts that are levying property taxes in the city as well. And so what we show down here is not just the city portion, which is the dark blue, like this whole bar here would be shown down here for Bend, but also property taxes paid to the county, property taxes paid to other districts. So in Bend, as I mentioned before, there's both a parks district and a library district. So this yellow portion is really large here compared to the other cities. And then for schools. And I know there are, school boundaries do not always align perfectly with cities. So what I did here was just kind of grab the rate from the district that had the most assessed value within that city, just to kind of show what most homeowners would be paying to schools in their boundaries. So the layered local tax rate, while we talked about city taxes earlier, the layered local tax rate in Salem is actually a little bit higher than it is in Eugene. And of course, property tax bills, so what people are paying is not just a function of the rate. Values obviously play a role as well, and it also plays a role in kind of how much revenue the city or whichever entity is levying the tax is receiving from the bill. So though it has comparatively higher property tax rates, at least in this small sample of 3, the average tax bill in Eugene is significantly lower than Bend, and relatively close to Salem, although I forgot the bond levy on this chart, so it'd be a little bit higher than what it is here, but not completely out of line with what with tax bills in Salem. But when you look at the city portion, this is where you really see kind of that full service aspect that I talked about. Eugene really does have probably a greater share, and that would be because the city of Eugene is doing so much certain other functions that other entities are doing in Bend and Salem. So they're receiving a little bit more of the revenue here than the other cities. So this last section, we're kind of going to come back to the information that was talked about in the previous council meeting where we discussed job growth in the TAG. And I know that that you all have probably spent some time with these data, so I won't spend too much time on them, but it really was remarkable to look at job growth in Eugene compared to the other cities in this group and how much Eugene's growth has lagged compared to those cities. And in fact, it's the only city where population growth, despite not being remarkable in Eugene, has exceeded job growth. Before circling back to the benchmark that I referred to earlier, kind of that best managed big US cities. And that's where I'll pull the rug out from everything I say by telling you benchmarks can only tell you so much. And we can reflect on that at the end. And I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts about that as well. So this is probably the 4th view of this chart that you all have seen, but this is again, showing metropolitan employment. So unfortunately, we don't have city employment from the Bureau of Labor Statistics indexed to 1991. So this, where everybody's at 1, that's kind of the start year. And there's no kind of magic to that number. It's just when this data set started. And then over here at the end, this is 2024. So what this chart is telling you is how much has employment grown in the time period of 1991 to 2024. And in Eugene, has grown significantly less than in the other cities. So the Eugene region has seen 33% growth during this time period, compared to 50% in Spokane, 60% in Salem, 96%, so almost doubling in Fort Collins, 143% in Bend, all the way up to Boise, which has seen just incredible growth over this time period. And so Eugene is clearly kind of lagging, at least in this group. Another way to look at this data is to kind of compare it to what I would call a demand for services. So obviously population growth can be a good thing. population growth also does mean demand for services. So one takeaway from the fact that regional employment, which is this dark blue column, has grown less than population, which is this light blue column. Eugene's really the only city where we see this pattern. It's the only city where the city population has grown more than regional employment. Even though population has not grown astronomically, in fact, it's the second lowest growth of all the cities on this list except for Spokane. Still, it's grown faster than at least one measure of economic health or economic growth, which is the number of jobs. So we can read this as the demand for services has grown faster than the economy, even though population growth has not been, off the charts here. And again, this is that same time period, 1991 to 2024. So obviously a lot of relevance to the broader work that the city is doing in follow-up to the tag. So this kind of brings me back to brings us to this benchmark from in this case, WalletHub. And this is called the best and worst run cities in America, although I'm really not sure if it's really the worst run because I didn't see anything actually bad mentioned in these other cities. I'm also not really sure how they grabbed the 148. Like there's some very, very tiny cities. For example, I think the number 1 ranked city in this list was Nampa, Idaho, which is like the size of the bubble denotes the size of the population. It's obviously very tiny. And then Fort Collins and Bend are not on the list, which I don't know if that's good or bad. But anyway, Boise was number 4 on this list. Eugene was number 32, so in kind of the top 5th. Salem was number 49, so in the top 3rd of this ranking. And then Spokane was number 87, so right in the middle. And what this ranking attempted to do was to take a number of factors like financial stability, economy, safety, and infrastructure, and then some other aspects like education, health, and pollution, and roll them up into sort of how well run are these cities. And I think this is really interesting, and it kind of brings, I just thought this was an interesting view of, the methodology I think was interesting, because a lot of these factors, I think, are in control of cities, like obviously financial stability. That's what we're all talking about, or what you all are going to be talking about a lot in the next couple of years and have been spending quite a lot of time talking about. And then there are infrastructure, how much cities are investing or how much they can invest in infrastructure. And then there are some aspects that are like clearly outside of the city government's control, like how good the education system is. And so to me, it just kind of reminds me, and I hope this is one of the takeaways for you all as well, that that city entities are not acting alone in a bubble. I think it relates to the work that you all are doing related to collaboration and regional collaboration with other entities. But it gets back to sort of what did each of these cities as an actor do to make the dark blue portion of the bar grow? And that would I think would require a lot of additional research, and probably you'd get different answers depending on who you talk to. So, there's a lot of aspects of these rankings that I think are really important and that, city decision makers can move on. And then there are other things that I think are more like, what kind of community do you want to be and how much is that in our control and how can we work with our partners to kind of get to the place that we want to be. So I'm sorry for the rant, but that was sort of my takeaway when I was reading this. Really helpful, really interesting. I think it's cool that Eugene is in the top 5th, and I don't disagree with it. And also, I hope that the data I showed you and things like this analysis can kind of put Eugene in the context of what you need to decide. And that is what I have. So I think I'm supposed to give it back to Twyla.
And actually, Twyla's still having some connection issues on her end, so I'm going to go ahead and walk through the next slide here, which is the long-range financial planning process and next steps. And then we'll turn it over to questions. And again, I'm Neil Obringer. I'm the city's assistant finance director. So just walking us through where we're going next in terms of the long-range financial planning process. Starting on the left side here, we've got the benchmarking and long-range financial planning overview, which is our meeting today. next, we've got April 8th, which PDD will be bringing back an economic development conversation, which will be an extension of the TAG conversations around economic development. May 11th, that will really be laying the groundwork for some of the additional work that will be coming over the spring and the summer. So general education and background. Twyla and Maurizio will be bringing a financial condition update with a focus on the general fund and distressed funds. And then we'll have a strategic plan overview and touch point. May 20th, it's been a number of years since we've updated the organization's financial policies. So we'll be bringing a conversation to you all around the financial policies and giving you some background there for future conversations, as well as following up on past conversations around the core mandated and essential functions of the organization. June 8th, setting the stage for future strategic plan, refresh conversations. There'll be a touch point on the strategic plan. Unfunded needs, we're going through an organization-wide effort right now looking at unfunded critical needs from across the organization. So we'll be bringing that information back to you all, along with information around debt capacity and tools and levers that we have available to us. This is all laying the groundwork for a June council workshop, where we're really developing the focus of that workshop with our new incoming city manager. But we'll plan to discuss financial policies, including service prioritization, as well as other items. So that's the June council workshop. And then into July, we'll be continuing that conversation on the strategic plan refresh that we started in the month prior. And all of this is work that's being developed to help inform and guide the future budget development processes, which will then start in the fall of this coming year. So I think with that leads us into questions for Sarah and others. So I'll turn it over to you, the Mayor.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate this presentation today and this update. I will add myself to the queue in our discussion, but I just want to say at the outset that, Sarah, some of what you shared about the ways in which the City of Eugene is stretching the resources that we do have, I would think that would be one of the components that would lead to some of those distinctions around being one of the best managed cities in the country, to be very creative and collaborative, and to be resourceful in how we're meeting some challenging community needs, especially in light of the rest of the information that you shared in this presentation, which I think paints a picture for us that will help this council and our new city manager and future councils to do really important work, building greater opportunity and greater stability in our community. I think this work illuminates some blind spots that we have had, and also provides us with the opportunity to interrupt some long-held narratives that perhaps are not serving us as well as they could. And all of that I take to be really positive. I think that this is incredibly important work, and I very much appreciate that you have updated information here even since the technical advisory group looked at this same information or same questions last year, and appreciate how their questions have informed the group. I have Councillor Zelenka, Councillor Clark, and Councillor Groves in the queue. And so Councillor Zelenka, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. One of the things I've learned over 30 years experience with the City of Eugene doing this stuff is that benchmarking is very fraught with problems and need to be analyzed and used very carefully. Often it's apples and lizards as comparisons. Cities are so different in structure and circumstance that it's often very difficult to make comparisons. And I take all of this with a big grain of salt. It's much more complex than it appears, with numerous factors affecting all these different comparisons. It's interesting, but simple, straightforward, or it is not. And we need to be careful about policy decisions based on this kind of data and these kind of benchmarkings, and be very wary of people cherry picking data points. This is why we have not, in the 30 years I've been at the city, relied on these kind of comparisons to make budget and policy decisions, because they're very fraught. Let me give you some examples. For instance, the general fund. It totally depends on how the services are accounted for and if they have dedicated funds or if they're in the general fund. And FTE per capita depends on which services you're providing. Like if you tried to do that with Springfield and Eugene, we have parks in our city. Springfield has Willamette Lane, so they don't show up. We have an airport. Other cities don't. So what's this package of services? That makes it very, very difficult to make comparisons like this. Like police and fire FTE per capita is so much more complex than the comparison that was shown. Total employment growth. I mean, all of that over time, there's a lot of things that are unclear in that or not reflected in it, like economic transitions that took place. Like Eugene's transition from a timber wood products into more of a high tech. So there's been this shift in employment, and those types of total gross numbers don't necessarily see those transitions. It can be masks in there, and so that makes the comparison very difficult. But I will cherry pick one, even though I said we shouldn't. And the one that struck me was we should provide more services for less cost per capita than all the other cities, meaning we're better bang for our buck in the city, leading to that one of the best managed cities. Whether or not that's true or not, I think it probably is, but I don't know that we make a whole bunch of decisions based on that, cherry picking of that one, for instance.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I suppose I will grant to my friend Alan some degree of truth in what he's just said, or agreement, I suppose is a better way to say it, that, everybody has their differences. All the communities being compared have significant differences. That's certainly true. But I wanted to say, Sarah, thank you. I have longed for us to do this sort of comparative financial review and analysis for years. I have wanted to look at the statistics of how we stack up compared to other cities and other communities in the general West in a similar way for a very long time, and I'm really glad we're doing it. I'm going to stay the optimist here and say that I think that from this sort of data, we can learn a great deal. If we find an area we'd like to grow and we'd like to do better, I suspect there are ways we can take advantage of the knowledge based on what other people do that can assist us. We don't have to take the bad parts. So I thank you for the work. It's phenomenal. I really appreciate it. I only had one question at the beginning with the demographic pieces of it that were interesting to me. In the compared communities, Sarah, how would you say, or how would you list or notate the surrounding cities to each of the listed communities? For example, and the reason I want to know more about what kind of information is available. 10 years ago, I made a lot of arguments that I thought our land use policies would make us more dense, certainly, but it would create a reality where young families would move to the surrounding communities, and that may not serve us. That was my argument at the time. And so I think in this data, we see it reflected that a lot of younger families with young children don't live here comparatively to other communities. But I believe they live in the surrounding areas around Eugene and interact and use services in Eugene. Is there measurement of that in between the comparative cities of some nature?
Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute. It's a really good question, and I should note that I worked as a part of the City of Springfield's work that's sort of relevant. We did a very similar analysis for their work, and we did look at household size. And I did note in that analysis that the City of Springfield had significantly larger households and more children than Eugene. I haven't looked at neighbor cities in these other regions, but I'm thinking, obviously visibly, I think that Eugene may be unique in having that kind of next door neighbor city right there that has kind of relatively robust services as well. I'm also doing similar work in the city of Corvallis, which has Albany right next door. And so a lot of the questions that you bring up are, I think, really relevant, especially in cities that are not like the kind of big anchor city in a region with like a lot of small suburbs.
As we move forward, can we get any further information or research that you have done or may at some point do about regional statistics with regard to all the comparative cities in this particular set?
Yeah, definitely. I'll give it a thought. I can at least provide a little bit on the Springfield analysis and maybe Corvallis, Eugene, and then give it some thought as well.
Okay, and I would include our areas of like Veneta, Elmira, and Creswell, and Junction City and Coburg, all of the surrounding smaller communities make up a different nature, I think, than in many cities, and that's what I'd be interested in having. Thank you.
Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Sarah, for providing a very good presentation. And Neil, I appreciate the timeline. I've been asking for something like that. It helps me understand how we're going to start putting these pieces together. I did appreciate the side-by-side comparisons. I recognize it's not perfect. You did catch the difference between 911 services. You did catch the difference where some fire departments provide ambulance service, others don't. That definitely has an impact on staffing levels. The airport piece, I think, was a significant thing that maybe could be better explained in there. Eugene runs an FAR Part 135 Index C airport that's heavily used. Bend has a general aviation airport. They're commercial airports in Redmond. Salem has a few commercial flights, but most of it's, again, a GA airport. Spokane's an international airport, and so is Boise. So, I mean, that would just help with some of those adjustments, but we do run a full suite of services. As far as cherry picking the data, my observation with this council is we cherry pick our issues that we cherry pick the data for. So I don't think that, having something like this to look at is a bad thing. I mean, there's certainly some qualifications in there. And then I agree with Councillor Clark. I was going to raise the issue of wanting to know more about the effect of our surrounding communities, because they're all growing, not just in housing, but they are growing in jobs as well. And I would be interested to know if they're growing at a faster rate than we are, at the same rate, or a slower rate. That would be something we want to look at as well. And part of that is because some of them have available land when we have a constrained land inventory. And I think all these pieces go together as we try to put together how we're going to build our economy, how we're going to handle housing. We're already, more dense than these other communities. I think there's more digging we need to do on this. So that's all I have for now, and I appreciate the work. Thank you.
Mayor, could I respond just to one? I think what would be helpful in follow-up is not just the information that Councillor Clark requested, but I should probably also provide the definition of the metropolitan boundary here, because I don't, if there's jobs that are happening in some of the cities that you're interested in, they might or might not be in these data.
Thank you, Sarah. Very appreciated. Councillor Kaczynski.
Yes, thank you. I very much appreciate the report and the research and the information, and being able to look at these kind of comparisons, even recognizing that there are differences, is very helpful. And I really appreciate the way that you highlighted a lot of those differences. So like emphasizing, Bend doesn't run a library. And so that's probably the cause of some of those changes. I had a specific question, specifically looking at the city spending on police, fire, and parks comparatively. One of the things that I kind of take away from that slide, which I think was 19, is that Eugene is putting a greater share of its resources into public safety compared to those other cities. Is that a reasonable conclusion to draw from that?
I think that was actually, as if I recall the tag discussion correctly, one of the observations the tag made. I mean, I think that is maybe more of an appropriate question kind of for you all as at your level and for the tag and kind of what they were pondering. But yes, I mean, that's one way to view the data, is that, you know, I think we'd have to have a whole pie chart probably to make that distinction. And to Councilor Zelenka's point, there would still be 6 million caveats that I wouldn't be able to cover, especially with respect to public safety. You know, when you think about public safety spending and public safety staffing, that's why this chart is so terrible, which I didn't spend enough time explaining all the caveats, but like cities pay, you know, a lot of money to do staffing studies, and there are many different ways, not just uniformed officers, but like all kinds of different ways to do a better job of just than this. And also just in the context of the tag, that was kind of the depth to which I was able to go while covering kind of the full view of the city. But yes, to your point, Councilor Kaczynski, I think that's one way you could view this data.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And thank you again for all the information.
You're welcome.
Councilor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, thank you for the breadth of information. I have 3 things that stand out. First, I just want to denote or editorialize. I started my radio career in Denver, and I would think that a Boulder, Colorado would be way more of a Eugene vibe than a Fort Collins, Colorado. But I see what you were getting at in regards to population size. Fort Collins square mileage is significantly larger than Eugene, and Boulder significantly smaller. A city that is right around the same is Paris, France. 41 square miles to our 44 square miles. And when we talk about density, we could do so much more in our community as Paris packs around 2 million people into 44 square miles for Paris proper. So I would urge our colleagues to continue to look at policy that inspires or encourages Eugene to grow up and not out. 3 things that jump out at me. Number 1, public safety. The fact that you pointed out Eugene is hovering near Spokane in regards to property crime is a sobering statistic. I wanted more about the public safety piece and where we stack up with the cohort that you've created. The taxing authority. It is curious that, with the exception of Eugene having a gas tax, that we don't have more of a consumption fee at the local level when we clearly can, and I would argue should. And then when I say that, I want to say that with the caveat, not a regressive consumption fee, but I think there are avenues to explore in regards to a sales tax or a consumption fee that's not regressive. And finally, Bend is clearly booming, both in population growth and in regional employment. Sarah, what's your high level takeaway as to what Bend is doing right? Why is Bend attracting people and attracting the businesses within that region?
Well, my takeaway is probably that, you know, Bend is as beautiful as any city, including Eugene and the surrounding area, but didn't already have a University of Oregon there, you know, so the recreation economy could become the anchor. I am not an economist, I should say, but that's kind of my observation. I do know that when we talked about this chart and the previous one, it kind of came at the end of the tag process. And one of the members had said, you know, what's going on with growth and what's going on with jobs? And so we kind of pulled these data in. And there was a discussion, and this was my observation too, that wouldn't it be great if we had more time to figure out what the cities did and what the regions did and how this came to be. There's just a little bit about that in the tag, obviously the recreation economy in Bend. In Boise, there was a huge growth in tech that I think we talked about, and then some downtown revitalization efforts, both in Boise and Spokane. But, you know, I think that what actually happened here is really important to understand. And to the previous point that you made, when you talk about your comparables, you know, this group is great. I was kind of advocating early on for Bellingham, Washington, because I think that's a really interesting place and has a similar vibe. but we stuck with 6, and it was plenty of work. But I hope when this work continues that it might be interesting to kind of look at like not only what did these cities do, but what else were other cities doing that Eugene either is like or aspires to be like, the cities as an actor, and then what was happening at the macro level that's like outside of the control of the city, and then what were they doing with their regional partners, including the private sector.
Great. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Gay.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Sarah, so much for bringing this data. And I also enjoyed the way you set up your slide presentation. So thanks for that. It was easy to see. I think this is one of those cases where if you think that this data is misleading and much more complex than it appears, you're right. And if you think it's useful and a starting point for additional research and discussion, you are also right. Right? It's not an and or. It's this can be useful information, and we can find a way to use it. And while we keep in mind the ways that it might be misleading and the complexities that are behind them. And I think that as a group, we are more than capable of doing that. We have smart folks on this council that I'm always happy to work with. So I am not concerned in that area that we will be able to use it appropriately. I don't know if this is a question that can be answered, but I often do not prefer to think of our neighbors as our competition, but more as like, how can we think about these things regionally, right? Springfield is a lovely town. I have no problem with people wanting to live and work in Springfield, or someone who lives in Eugene maybe getting a job in Springfield. So, is there ways that we can take that into account so we're not always looking at our neighbors as our competitors?
Is that a question for me, or just sort of a, okay.
No, maybe it's more just to keep in mind. I don't know if that's more of an attitude we just need to bring to it. That's the attitude I would like to find a way to bring to it. I mean, we need to advocate for our city, and we need to find ways to, meet our budget needs and all these things. But when we're always like, Crestwell is the, oh no, we don't want people moving to Crestwell. I don't know that that's the answer. I don't know. You don't have to answer anything. I'm just making a statement.
Thank you for clarifying, Councillor. Other councillors in the queue? Okay, then seeing no more discussion from this group, I will offer one closing thought, and then Sarah will move on and Neil will move on to our next agenda item today. And I think what Councillor Ye just expressed is really important with this data, and I hope any of our local media or community members who are listening along to this work session today do exactly what was advised, which is to really look at the summary and the conclusions that have been presented by people with expertise in this area, and also observe that as the presentation builds, more complexity comes to this circumstance that we find ourselves in. I think it is incredibly important that we have more and better information as we think about fiscal stability and economic development for our community, because as a body of elected officials, we are always striving to make the best possible decision that we can within a limited amount of time and with the best information available. And I really do think that this information and the TAG processes led into it, the additional workshops, work sessions, and retreat that council will have in these coming months with our new city manager, Jenny Haruyama, that all of that is more and better information to inform our decision-making into the future. And we clearly have some important areas to do work in terms of expanding opportunity and economic development in our community. So very much appreciative for this presentation and the way that it kicks off the series of council work sessions that we'll have focused on this work. And again, just want to appreciate Sarah, your team, and also Neil jumping in to help cover some of the information from our own finance experts in our department. So City Manager Rodriguez, I see your hand raised, and after your comments, then we'll move to the next item.
Just briefly want to echo the kudos to Sarah and to our finance team who did amazing work in the fall, and we're really excited to be having this conversation with you on long-range financial planning, building on some of the work that we did through the technical advisory group process. Just Counselor Ye, just a little bit to your question that didn't necessarily need to be answered, but I think one of the opportunities where we are having conversations about what are our strengths as a region and how we come together as partners is in the South Willamette Valley Innovation Corridor conversation. It is kind of a different way that we're looking at this together and assessing, like, with all the partners, what can we bring to the table so we're strong as a region. So I think there's a lot of really positive energy in thinking that way as we move forward.
Thank you, City Manager. Turns out prosperity and economic development is a team sport. It always has been. And we're going to be a really strong player on that team in our city. Thank you, everyone. This concludes our first agenda item today. And now I will turn to the City Manager to introduce our second topic, which is a work session on the Wednesday work session formats for City Council.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is on the future Wednesday work session formats. In order to give staff enough time to implement process changes during Council's upcoming break, if you choose to move forward with them, this topic was separated from the remaining 2 operating agreement discussions that will be coming back to you after spring break. And now I'll turn it over to Katie LaSala for a brief presentation.
Thank you, Matt. I think my screen is sharing. I'm sure someone will tell me if it's not. Katie LaSala, your city reporter, and I am back to talk about the Wednesday work session format. Just some quick reminders. Matt covered this for the most part, but this conversation started within your operating agreements discussion. And we were not able to get to all of the topics due to time constraints at the February 18th work session. And so those additional, I know some of you had questions, those additional operating agreements items will come back in the spring. But today we're going to focus on Wednesday work session. So you've already seen this slide, but just as a reminder, Wednesday work sessions are currently held in virtual only format. And this started as a budget reduction strategy implemented during the 23-25 biennium. Council has discussed coming back fully in person, which would include inviting the public in. We've done some estimations of the costs associated with that. And this has a bit more of a breakdown than I think your last presentation did. So approximately $39,000 annually for 27 work sessions. And I've got the meals broken down, $11,000 for meals. Security includes EPD support as well as the support we get from the Holt Center to run the security machine in the lobby, and then about $8,000 annually for additional staff time to set up. Council has also discussed implementing a hybrid in-person option where council and staff would only come back. And in this case, that would reduce the cost to about $15,000 for a total of 27 Wednesday work sessions. Your meals would stay the same. The security costs would be eliminated, and the staff time to set up would be reduced to about $4,000 annually. A very quick presentation this time. I'll turn it back over to the mayor for discussion. You do have 2 possible motions available to you, one for the hybrid option and one for the in-person. And I will stop sharing my screen. Happy to take any questions, Mayor.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for that brief summary and presentation. We may need those slides back depending on council discussion, but I have Councilor Clark, Groves, and then Kaczynski as the first 3 in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wondered on the line item expenditures for security and additional staff. I'm trying to separate or drill down on those numbers a little bit. I heard you mention the Holt Center piece of equipment, and I assume what we're interfund transfer, we're paying the Holt Center within city budgets from one department to another for the use of that, perhaps not. This is what I'm asking about drilling down on. Would those police officers and security staff be paid? This is additional money that they would not be paid otherwise, or the staff as well? Are these additional dollars that we'd have to budget new dollars for, or would that be something that's already covered within current budgeting?
Thank you for the question, Counselor. The machine we've already purchased. The Holt Center staffing are extra dollars. They are, because their staff are so knowledgeable about having to use that equipment. We do through basically like paying them, the CMO pays them to send staff over to support us. So that's an extra cost that wouldn't be associated with the standard meeting format that we had before or that we have currently right now. And EPD.
Forgive me, I apologize. It's still a city expenditure within the framework of the current budget. It wouldn't be an extra expenditure to the city budget. Am I correct about that question?
Those staff are not salaried full-time employees. They are hourly temp. I think they're under temp, but I could make that more clear with an email follow-up if that's a question. So no, it is not already an expenditure that is being paid.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think you said the EPD piece, right now they are currently getting, for our Monday night meetings, that is overtime.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Katie and staff, for the work that you put into this. I do appreciate it. I think in-person meetings are more productive. I think it's easier to carry on a conversation, and I support them. At the same time, I am concerned about adding any new costs right now. We're already trying to maintain a balanced budget. We are looking and considering potential new fees, and I just think we need to be running on an austere cost system at this point. So I will be a no vote on this, unfortunately. Thank you.
Councilor Kaczynski.
Yes, I think I would agree with Councilor Groves that in-person meetings, I think, are much more produce much better collaboration, much more constructive conversation. Looking at how we can achieve that with while still moving forward that cost savings, I had a couple of different questions. First of all, personally, I'm buying my own lunch now for the Wednesday meetings, so I would be fine with not getting lunch on Wednesdays even if we went back to in-person, just as part of that cost savings. The question I had with the hybrid format where we wouldn't have the public have access to that, if we allowed the media to be in person for that, would we have to have the same level of security, EPD there at all?
My sense is yes, but I see popped on. Basically, if it's internal staff or council, we wouldn't run the machines. If it's external parties, we would. But that is my understanding, and Brooke may have a different opinion on that.
I agree with that. I just note that the definition of media is quite open and vague in terms of the state. And so while it, is nice to be able to extend that option for things like executive sessions, it's very challenging to regulate who is and who is not media.
Okay. With that in mind, I feel like it sounds like if we do the sort of hybrid option where we're in person, public is virtual, it's really the same experience for the public as they're getting now because they can only watch us on the computer now. And particularly if we look at sort of those meals, I feel like we can get this down so it's like, $2,000 or $3,000 to switch back to in person for us, and that seems if we can do that sort of lowest cost option and go back to in person, it feels like it kind of accomplishes both goals. So thanks.
Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the ain't broke, don't fix it camp. Appears to be a solution looking for a problem to solve. Even in the hybrid, the additional cost, even if we went minimal, the benefit of us being in person seems pretty minimal, especially if there's a cost associated with it. And if we have costs associated, I'd rather pay for home energy scoring staff to do it than watch us talk. So I'm not sure even a hybrid one gets my vote.
Councillor Ye.
Yeah, thanks. So my question is, are we required to provide ourselves food when we meet in person?
No, Counselor, that is a benefit.
Okay, so I agree with Councillor Groves and Councillor Kaczynski that I do think we do better work when we're in person. I just think it's easier to communicate with people. Everything is better not staring at a screen, you know, apart from each other. But I do think that folks who are concerned about the costs are also not wrong. I think Eliza's idea that maybe we do them the hybrid option, but you know, we have to brown bag our lunch, and we're all adults. I think we're perfectly capable of doing that. I would be in favor of doing that, because I think the benefits that we get from being in the room together outweigh the inconvenience of having to get there. That's what, you know, we did a hybrid version when we were at LCC, when the public was not in the room, and that seemed to work fine. I don't think that there was an issue with that. So I would be more than happy to do that if there are enough people interested.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in agreement with what sounds like the majority of my colleagues in regards to council being more effective when we can gel together in person. It's better for council and our staff relationships. And with Jenny, our new city manager, coming on board, it is a perfect opportunity for us to have just one more in-person touch point and work so much better together as a team in three-dimensional space rather than this one-dimensional or two-dimensional, whatever we are in the virtual space. Regards to lunch, I'm planning on eating leftovers from Monday night's council meeting for my lunch today. So like, I'm an adult, I can figure out what I can do for lunch. I'm not going to let that be a barrier. The hybrid approach with the aforementioned tweaks is where I would like to see it as council go, with the caveat that some of us for the first 6 months in the new year in 2027 will be working in Salem. And I would want us to recognize that it will be incredibly difficult during that time to be in person in the middle of the workday. So I understand through our operating agreements there are some carve outs for folks who might need to chime in remotely. I would like us to maintain that flexibility with the goal of when we can, if provided we're not ill, provided we're not working, that we can come together in person and gel together for the benefit of the entire community.
Councillor Leach.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm with the majority of my colleagues here that we do better work. And when we say we do better work, we mean we are better policy makers for our community. We do better working together and with our teams and our staff, and hearing presentations from people who are coming in and doing an incredible amount of work to put together information for us. So I think we owe it to the community to put ourselves in the best space and the best possible ability for the outcomes that we want for the work that we all are very committed to doing. I don't have a problem with bringing my own lunch or having my own lunch. So for me, the minimal cost is absolutely worth it if even one decision that we make a year is a better decision because we are able to work together more effectively. I understand, yes. So I love that we are able to be hybrid, because like right now this week I have COVID and I can't be there, in person with y'all. But So it's good to have that option. I think it's incredibly important, though, that we have the opportunity to be together. It's the additional conversations, it's the ability to connect on all these different other points that we have to work on. And so I'll be supporting moving forward with a hybrid option today.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually just asked the questions because I was looking for a solution. I agree with almost all my colleagues who've mentioned this, that I think we do much better work in person, and it allows for other conversations on, to take place and for us to work out the details of things in a manner in which I think is more productive and leads to better decision making. I'm entirely for it. But like Randy, I have some concerns about the cost, thus the questions I was asking about how we might restructure it. But I do want to note, I did have a note from a constituent who knew that we were having this discussion in advance and made what I thought was a valid point, which was that the public has a right to interact with us when we are having a public meeting. And if we're going to be somewhere in public at a public meeting, having the public present is their right. It doesn't have anything to do with us. And I thought that was a valid point. If we're going to have a meeting in City Hall, we should allow the general public to be in, and that's going to drive the expense issue that Randy mentioned, and thus lead to me thinking, do we make the whole expense or do we don't? And I'm not sure the answer to that 100%. I tend towards, I don't think we should do the extra expense, but I sure do understand the value of it. So thank you.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to share my response to the public engagement piece. Our work sessions are built and set up in a way we don't accept public comment right now anyway. We do on our Monday nights or our Monday evening meetings, and obviously when there are public hearings. And any constituent can reach out to us via email at any time about any topic at any time. And the public at large can view any work session or any gathering of this body at any time, as they may be watching as we speak. I would encourage colleagues not to let the public participation piece or the perceived public participation piece be a barrier, in that, as I understand it, the hybrid format doesn't change anything than what we're doing right now in regards to public engagement. It's a work session for council to hear from experts and to ask each other questions and ask experts questions and come up with policy recommendations for implementation. I'll leave that there and encourage support of the hybrid approach as mentioned earlier. Thanks.
Councillor Zelenka.
Yeah, my question is, what is the hybrid approach? So we have these three costs in the AIS. I assume people are talking about minimal cost scenario, hybrid scenario. So the meals go away. And then the security costs would go away if we just limited it to staff and us. So does the administrative support costs still, would that still be a cost if we did the hybrid where part of it was us were in person?
Some
so
of that
just $8,000.
Some of that will be reduced even beyond the 4 that I've estimated, because some of that estimation is related to food setup and cleanup, but it doesn't go away completely. There's always a staff cost associated with running an in-person meeting. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, so $6,000 to $7,000 in that range. Okay.
Katie, I'm sorry, Councillor, just to be clear, Katie, you were saying it goes below $4,000.
Correct. In the hybrid with no food, it would go below 4, but it's not 0. It's somewhere in between.
$3,000 to $4,000 for additional administrative costs, but the other ones don't need to be incurred. Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Kaczynski.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I received the same email I think Councillor Clark did, and I do feel like that was a sort of valid sort of perspective. I think if we were discussing moving from what was in person where the public could attend to a setup where the public couldn't attend, I would feel a little bit differently about it. But right as it stands right now, the public can't attend this meeting except as names on a list in a box over here. And so, I think we're not making things worse for the public by doing it this way. And that is why I asked about the media, because I felt like if the media will allow us to kind of have that representative of the public there, that would be nice. But since the whole point of doing the hybrid is to save money, if it doesn't save any money. So, thanks.
Thank you, Council, for that discussion. If we have concluded, I am going to turn to the Council President to put a motion forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Move to direct the city manager to transition the Wednesday council work sessions from the current virtual only format to a hybrid format where council and city staff are in person and the public is virtual, and to address any budgetary needs through a supplemental budget request. Do I need to amend that to also include, okay, and make it noted that meals will not be included in this meeting?
Second.
Thank you, Council President, Council Vice President. Deputy City Attorney, want to confirm that motion meets the reason why your hand is raised?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
That addressed it.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Council President and Vice President. Any discussion from Council? I see Councillor Zelenka.
So does that, because it says only staff and the council, that means the security costs are a moot point, right? Okay. So just, and because we're not doing food, it's really only around $3,000 or $4,000. Right. And you still have the option to be remote, even if you can't be here as a counselor. I mean, thanks.
Yeah. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I don't mean to be a stick in the mud here. I just want to ask the manager a more specific question. We have had council meetings in person where people may feel the need to protest and know that we're there and may want to communicate with us, whether we're inviting them in by opening the door or not. And that's part of my reason for saying that people have a right to be there if we're meeting in a particular place. Would we still think it wise not to include security provisions if we're meeting in person but not having the general public invited in?
Councillor, I think that's something that we would monitor to see if it becomes an issue. Council is able to access the main building without directly exiting the council chambers. So there are some different things that we could look at if that did become an issue.
But you're comfortable with we could proceed with this without security provision?
Well, I think ultimately it's up to the council to make that decision, and we would adjust depending on what we saw. If it became a concern, we would definitely work with council to see what we want to do and what we could do to assist.
Thank you.
Councillor Krasinski.
Yeah, this is probably way too small to actually bring up. But when we say the city staff and the council in person, would that include any invited presenters who may not be employed by the city but are there to present us, like the presentation we got today?
Yes, that would be my understanding of how we would facilitate a meeting where a presenter was non-city staff. Typically, they have a city staff partner that is shepherding them through that process.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
City Manager?
Yeah, just briefly, I'm sorry, I was reminded by one of our staff, but just Councillor Clark, another piece. We do actually have security on site during the day normally. So that is another resource we would have if we had any concerns.
Thank you, City Manager. It's a great team. I think that concludes our additional discussion of this motion and second. So I'll now take a vote for this motion. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And all opposed? 1, 2. And the motion passes with a vote of 5-2. Thank you, everyone, for our meeting today. Thank you for extending our meeting to create the time for this discussion today, and to our presenters. That concludes our agenda, and I now close the March 11th, 2026 City Council work session. We are adjourned.